Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in for another one of our Sunday Q&As. I'm thrilled tonight to be joined by my House colleague, Delegate Jay Jones. He is running for Attorney General after serving in the House representing Norfolk. He is our first Attorney General candidate to come on and join us tonight. He's a UVA law alum, and he has been one of my wonderful teammate in the trenches as we have been pushing the pace of what's possible in Richmond. I'm thrilled to have him here tonight. Jay, how are you doing this evening?
I am happy. I'm thrilled to be here. It's good to see you virtually, Sally. And I've been looking forward to this. I've watched a couple of the other ones that you've done over the last few weeks. I think this is really cool. And I think it's a great concept. And it's a really wonderful way for us to get in front of folks, right? Especially during these strange times. So looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you for being a part of it. You know, in normal times, we would obviously have you out here to Charlottesville, which I know you know well. But in the absence of that, it's great to be able to have you tune in from afar and to give an opportunity for all of our constituents to have a chance to get to know you, what you're about and why you're running for Attorney General. I'm looking forward to this. This is our first time talking with an Attorney General candidate. And so I'm sure that part of what we will do is talk about what that job is all about, because it's such an important one that I think some people are less familiar with. So we'll be excited to talk about those nuts and bolts. Real quick, let me handle just a little bit of housekeeping for folks who are turning in maybe for the first time. There are two places that you can be watching us tonight, on YouTube and Facebook, and there are chats for each. And so if you want to ask a question to help steer our conversation for tonight, please feel free to drop it in the chat there, and we will make sure that we get to it over the course of the next hour. To get things started, I will ask Delegate Jones here a few questions just about who he is and how he came to this work. But we will absolutely get to the questions that matter to you most as we go along. So please don't hesitate to make sure that we follow the work that you want to do. Let me real quick, before I give Delegate Jones a chance to introduce himself, just start by talking to you about why I'm so excited to welcome him back to the Charlottesville community. Delegate Jones is a class ahead of me in the House. He ran for the first time in 2017, and I was 2 years behind him in 2019. But he has been one of those people who has been eager to bring other new folks along and to help build up that bench of young delegates in Richmond. He is always someone who is looking out ahead, not just in terms of what can we be doing right now, but what should we be doing to shape the culture in Richmond, so that we can have a clearer sense of what's possible for the long haul. As you'll see, as he gets a chance to tell you about his past and what brought him to public service, he has a really wide angle lens about the history that brought us here and the moment that we're in Virginia. And so I think he's always looking with that really long arc view of where we need to be going as a Commonwealth. So I'm thrilled to have a chance for you to get to know him tonight. And with that, I will just hand things over to Delegate Jones, give him a chance to tell you a little bit about who he is, where he comes from, and how he came to politics.
Yeah, so thank you, Sally. Those are really kind words. And as you know, right, it's a lot of fun serving together because we do have a lot of the same values and ideals for, I think, where we'd like to see Virginia go. And I think both of us now understand after service, even after just one session, you realize that it's a lot sort of more difficult to do these things than I think folks realize. But it's always great to have, like-minded folks and people you can stand shoulder to shoulder with to take on the challenging fights and to sort of shake up the status quo, because, this is Virginia. And I think for a long time, people have, settled, or they've just accepted things as they are because that's just always how it's been done. And so you in particular have been a breath of fresh air for the way that you approach things. And so I really, really appreciate that. And so again, thanks for having me tonight. It's always fun to get to sort of chat with you in particular. But I do want to share a little bit about myself, because I can't talk about anything related to my campaign without sort of telling folks who I am and what I'm all about. And for me, my story, my sort of being in this place is I'd say a little bit unusual, right? I'm the descendant of slaves on both sides of my family, 5 generations back, who toiled in the American South, including in Virginia. And I often think about, when I'm on the floor, when I'm on the campaign trail, what they would think about their descendant who has the opportunity not just to hold public office, but to run for a statewide office and be the first Black person to hold that office, in this case, Attorney General. And so it's never lost on me, where I come from. And that really does inform my viewpoint on a lot of things and how I approach a lot of the issues that we're seeing, particularly in this moment in Virginia. whether it's justice reform or housing or other issues that are sort of impacting communities of color, right? That's really sort of my driving force. But even more recent than that, my grandfather, Hillary H. Jones Jr., who, like me, was born and raised in Norfolk, Virginia, left for college and law school, right? He came back to Norfolk after he was at Virginia State, after he met my grandmother, after he had gone to serve in the war and come back, right? His college service was interrupted. And then he came back to Virginia State, then had to go to Boston for law school because they weren't letting Black folks get legal educations here in the South back then. And then he came back to Norfolk. And I've asked my dad this on several occasions because I'm like, well, why did, Grandpa come back, right? Because he could have stayed in the North, right? He could have gone elsewhere to sort of not have to deal with all the stuff that was happening. And, he said, look, I think he felt like he could make a change in his community and he could do right by Norfolk and help other people. And so he and my grandmother came back here, got very involved in the civil rights movement. My grandfather obviously is an attorney, and then my grandmother really more of like an activist, right? She was a homemaker and for a long, long time. And they even had my dad and my uncle integrate a school here in Norfolk in 1960 when my dad was 6 and my uncle was 10. And so I always kind of think about those times when I'm really frustrated, dejected, angry, sad about some of the things that I see that we're going through. And I'm like, well, just even a couple of generations before, it was pretty bad. And so, I said, look, they had it a lot worse than I do. So I need to pick myself up and we need to keep pushing forward. And so, those folks, right, those are the people who are really important to me. My grandfather, right, in addition to doing the civil rights stuff, was on the school board here and was on the State Board of Education. He was the first Black person to hold either of those roles. And he unfortunately died when he was 52. He had a heart attack, kind of unexpectedly. And my grandmother, who still had 3, sort of almost adult age sons, had to go back to work. And so she became a teacher, joined the teachers union here in Norfolk. And, their example, right, really sort of lights the way for me each and every day. And, look, I wasn't looking to get into public service. I grew up around it because my father was in the House of Delegates. My mother was a prosecutor, criminal defense attorney, right? So you're just kind of around some of this stuff. I went to William & Mary for undergrad and then went away to New York to work for a couple of years, was drawn back to Virginia, kind of like my grandfather, went to UVA for law school, spent 3 wonderful years in Charlottesville, living in a basement apartment on University Circle. I have very fond memories of those days. And then I came back to Norfolk and became a trial attorney, right? So I'm in court 3 or 4 days a week. Previously, I'm now on leave from my firm as I campaign full time, but that was my sort of day to day, and I was really enjoying that life. But then timing is everything, not just in politics but in life. And the seat that I currently hold came open because my predecessor was running for a constitutional office. She ran for city treasurer. And, folks will come to you and they say, hey, we think you do a good job, because I was active in the Norfolk Democratic Committee. I was sat on a couple of, commissions and boards on the local level. And I was a kid. I was 27 when the seat came open and I sort of made this decision to run. And you kind of run through a little checklist. I think everybody kind of does the same thing. It's right. Can I, win, right? Do I want to do this? Can I raise enough money to make it worth it? And if you kind of get to yes to all of those things, then you say, okay, let's give it a go. And was, ultimately successful and came in what at that point was a watershed sort of moment for Virginia politics, because we picked up, 15 seats in the 2017 elections and won all 3 statewides. And I think was really like a harbinger for where we were heading, and have done some pretty tremendous things in the legislature since then. I've been really proud of all the work that we've put out, but we've got a lot more to do. And it's been an incredible ride. And you make for new friends and relationships with folks from people all across the state who you would never expect, right? David Reed and I probably shouldn't be really, really close friends, but we are, right? I was in Loudon with him yesterday. And I think when I came in, I was on the younger end of the new delegate spectrum. He was on the older end, but we sort of gravitated towards each other. And it's been, a tremendous experience. But I think as we look ahead, there's so much more that we can be doing. And I think 21 is this really pivotal moment for this Commonwealth about how we're sort of going to set ourselves up for the next decade, right? The next 20 years and beyond.
I mean, I think your service has really straddled this sea change in Virginia politics, because you came in with this blue wave class of 2017 that came so close to flipping the House of Delegates. And so you served for 2 years in the minority, and then you have now served for 2 years with a class of 2019 in the majority, and all of the good work that has gotten done with the power that trifecta has allowed us. As you look back at your 4 years of service in the House, what are you most proud of the work that you've accomplished in that time?
There's a couple of bills that I personally am really proud of. Right, my first year, we had a terrible situation that happened down here in Hampton Roads with a young woman named Ashanti Billy, who was abducted over by the amphibious base by a gentleman who was ultimately later captured. He murdered her, and she was 18, 19 years old at that point. And that sort of brought up this idea that we don't have a missing person system for folks who were in that age between 18 and 60, right? Under 18, you're Amber Alert, over 60, you're Silver. But we know that if you get sort of the word out quickly, you have a much better chance of finding these people before long. And so it was unfortunate that it took her death to get us to do this. But we, in my first year, passed this bill called the Ashanti Alert. And now this is a statewide system. The state police are involved, local media is involved. So you might get these alerts on your phone sometimes. So that's one thing I'm super duper proud of. Obviously, broadly, Medicaid expansion was probably the most consequential vote that I've taken, in my 4 years. And we got that done when we were in the minority, which I think is pretty telling about what can happen when you are almost at parity, right? 51-49. Certainly some things that we did this year, right, with bringing Harry Byrd down, really, really special. A bill that I worked on really, really sort of closely with Legal Aid Justice was the juvenile review hearings. Prosecutors have been pleading away these 2-year review hearings for serious offenders who are children. And so you couldn't really necessarily measure the progress that they've made while they've been under the supervision of the Department of Juvenile Justice. So now we made it so that prosecutors can't do that. All right, you have to have these review hearings because I do think that when we talk about justice reform, like the next frontier that we've really got to address is our juvenile system. I think that a lot of times gets lost in the sauce, right, of the broader sort of justice reform conversation. But I think our juvenile system is just as bad in terms of how we are treating some of these children from a code perspective, right? I think that DJJ does an amazing job of housing them and trying to rehabilitate them. But I do think we can focus in on that sort of as we talk about the sort of, what's next, right? I think juvenile justice reform is one of those things that we really need to take a hard look at. But it's been a wild ride. I'm sure we'll talk about this, but obviously the bills weren't successful per se, but I think all of the work that you, me, and a whole host of others have done as it relates to energy in our system and regulating that system. I think I've lost weight, hair off my head and years off my life trying to keep the big boys honest, right? Like Hal and Henry said. But I think, again, even 4 years ago, it would be unheard of that we were even having these conversations at the legislative level about how we are treating Dominion, APCO, right? That's a really big deal because for so long they've been the hegemon and no one has ever challenged their status, right? And obviously we've rattled their cage on a number of occasions. And so I would call that a victory, right? Because even again, 4 or 5 years ago, you'd be run out of town if you dare say a bad word about how they're operating. So, it's been a wild ride. And again, 2 years in the minority, right? You learn how to sort of maneuver in that context. And I'm a little bit envious of you because you came in and we were, 55, and I think everybody has these expectations that we're going to do all of these tremendous things, but government doesn't work that way, right? Not every Democrat's created equal. We're all created equal. Not everyone thinks the same, right? We're all sort of different strains of ourselves, right? And that's a good thing. I think that's healthy for our democracy. But I think, from an outside perspective, sometimes people get a little frustrated that we haven't moved faster, right? We haven't done more. But again, you got to cobble together those coalitions. And I think most of my legislation has been bipartisan in nature. Sometimes it's straight party line, but I'm proud of the fact that Republicans dig what we've been putting up for the last few years. And I think that's pretty indicative of not just the relationships that we built, but the sort of tack we're taking policy wise.
Well, I think that's indicative of how you have to operate in the minority. If you're working on something like the Ashanti Alert that you would hope that anyone with a heart would have sympathy for. How do we not create a system that makes us, more responsive and responsible for missing persons? Those are the kind of opportunities you have to scout out if you're working in the minority. And then when you work in the majority, you have more room to work with. And I think working for a more compassionate and humane criminal justice system is something that we have prioritized, because Virginia is in so many ways just highly behind the times. I know both of us have worked really closely with the Legal Aid Justice Center, which of course is one of our cherished institutions here in the Charlottesville community. And then I think, as you said, one of the projects that we have teamed up on, which really does cut across party lines, is combating corporate corruption and standing up for consumer protection, particularly when it comes to state regulation of our utilities, because that is ultimately about making sure that everybody pays their fair share. And the coalitions that come together for that work cross a lot of traditional boundaries. I mean, you can get industry and environmentalists and consumers and all those people together because it's ultimately about putting people before party. And I think that, we have really enjoyed building those bridges and bringing people together for that work, because while there is like a technical issue at stake there, how much are Virginians paying for energy? What's the appropriate way to regulate our utilities? Then there is a deeper question, which is who writes the laws in Richmond? Like, does industry get to pick up the pen and put down the first draft and we just rubber stamp it? Or are we as legislators, the lawmakers, do we really take stewards, responsibility for that?
To me, right, the word that always pops in my head is like stewards. And I said it in the committee hearing for FIBA last year. I said, don't ever forget, right, that the utilities, right, as they're currently set up, their obligation is not to us as consumers, customers, ratepayers. It's to their shareholders, right? They're going to do everything they can to maximize the value of their firm within the enterprise, the system that we set up. Our responsibility and obligation is to the customer, right, to the consumer, to be there for them. And so I think sometimes that gets blurred a little bit. And again, even 4 or 5 years ago, just the thought of having these conversations and having the vigorous debate on these bills that we saw would be unheard of. And I think that we're moving in the right direction. We've obviously got to change some hearts and minds in the Senate, because I think you've seen a pretty clear mandate in the House, right? When FIBA got like 77 votes last year, and I think the bill that I put up this year got 60, right? I mean, that's pretty impressive, I think. And we talk about consumer protection, right? Running for Attorney General, that's a consumer protection office. And so that is obviously one of the motivations that I have in terms of pursuing the AG spot, because, to me, you've got to be there for the everyday Virginian, right? You've got to be there fighting for them each and every day in front of the SEC. And Mead and Mitch, the guys who are in the consumer division at the AG's office. I mean, they need help, right? We need more firepower to go toe to toe with these big guys who've got hundreds of lawyers, right? Who are billing out at really high rates, and they're doing everything they can to sort of obfuscate and hide the ball. And so we want to be able to go, toe to toe. And I talk a lot about values, right? Every AG kind of reinvents the office in their own mold, right? Their own image, and it is reflective of their values, like where you're putting resources and how much you are really getting involved and invested in some of these areas. And so, make no mistake, if elected, right, when elected, we will have bodies in that division to go up against those folks, right? Because at the end of the day, right, our obligation is always going to be towards the Virginia people. And I see no reason why we can't up the ante, right, and really use that office as a pulpit to spread the gospel about fairness, right, about equity, about everybody sort of shouldering the burden in a way that's going to be fair, and that's really important to me. And so, there's so much you can do with this office, but that's one of those places where we will really, lean in a way that I don't think you've seen in the last few years.
Well, I hope that people who are tuning in from Charlottesville could hear that and really understand just how far Richmond has moved in this time. I think sometimes it's easy for us here in the 57th to think that has always been the mindset, because I think a lot of the core institutions who've been pushing that for years have been here. I mean, the Southern Environmental Law Center, Appalachian Voices, some of these newer upstarts like Clean Virginia, that consumer protection mindset has really come out of Charlottesville in a lot of ways, but it took delegates like Delegate Jones who were bringing it into the mainstream and helping build those bridges around it to really take it out of the kind of the shouty crew from Charlottesville and make it a core platform. And you deserve tremendous credit for mainstreaming that issue. But I think what you have highlighted is that there is tremendous flexibility and latitude for what you do with the role of Attorney General. I mean, that you got a lot of freedom to define that role for how you want to. Talk to us about why you have chosen to take this step, having served in the minority and served in the majority, now to run for statewide office, and in particular for Attorney General. Why this, why now, and how do you see that office as serving the people of Virginia?
Yeah, look, I get this question a lot. And so, everyone's like, well, you're young and you've done, great stuff in 4 years. And my service is not nearly as long as some of our other colleagues, of course. But, I think life is a lot about timing, and politics is mostly about timing. I don't think it's Jay Jones or Sally Hudson or, whomever. It's that moment that you're in. And I think with what we saw last year, right, with the pandemic, with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, right, the whole host of things that were sort of brought to the forefront of all of our minds. We're in a moment, and I think that we can rise to meet that moment. My father and I often talk about sort of over the course of human history, right, times when things were really bad, but we as people sort of band together to face those challenges head on. And so I think we've got a lot to do. But I think 2021 is one of those pivotal moments because Virginia is changing, and it's changing rapidly. This is not the Virginia of 2017. When I first ran, you dare not talk about legalizing marijuana for fear of alienating voters. And now here we are, right on the cusp of doing something that is a framework that would get, hopefully get us to a place where we can, legalize and start that whole process. But, things change quickly. 8.5 million people and growing, right, by the day. And I think that this moment demands people who are going to step up, people who are going to be proactive, not reactive, people who are going to lead, and not follow, right, not sort of, be the people who come to the party late and then say, hey, let's take all the credit. We want people, right? We want to figure out who we want to highlight, value, and prioritize, right? And as we chart this new course forward. And I think this is going to be that election, right? I think it's going to be sort of one of those that people look back on after a couple of generations and they say that was a real change in Virginia, the real turning point when things, really crystallized. And I want to be a part of that. And I think that this office in particular is an incredibly fulsome office in terms of its purview, but also I want to use this platform to push, right? People look to statewide leaders for guidance, for leadership, and to not be silent, right? To step up and meet these moments, whether it's justice reform, which we've been talking about for a long time now. This isn't something that is new for me, right? Lived experiences, I could tell you a lot, right? And I shared a lot about my family's lived experiences in that speech that I gave a couple years ago on the floor, and that's something that is obviously important to me, and I'll never stop being a voice in the room, right? And being a loud voice, right? We talked about qualified immunity all last year. That we haven't done that yet is incredibly disappointing to me, right? Qualified and sovereign immunity, reforming that. But I've been so disappointed by the silence from folks who have an outsized influence and an outsized voice on that, right? Don't wait until the cake is almost baked to join the party, right? Step up, lead. And I think that, 2021 is a moment where folks are ready and clamoring for that. And I think I bring that to the table. And I think that, it's not lost on folks, right? We've never had a Black attorney general in this Commonwealth. And I think that's incredibly special. And I think when you talk about this moment, it is something I think that really does lend itself to this new Virginia decade that we are sort of entering into. And it's been exciting. It's been a lot of fun, right? We've gotten support from all over the Commonwealth at the federal, state, and local level. I'm sure, hopefully, most people saw this week that Governor Northam has endorsed our candidacy, which I think, is something that, speaks to not only the capacity that we have, but, his belief that we've got the energy, passion, conviction, vision, right, for this office as we continue to move ahead, and sort of highlighting folks who have traditionally not been at the table and voices that have, I think, traditionally been marginalized. And again, all of that is emblematic of the moment that we're in and where we are going, right? It's easy to look backward. It's easy because it's obviously right there in the rearview mirror, but we have to look ahead, right? You've got to say, okay, well, what's next? And how do we want to get there? And who do we want to be the people who are our mouthpieces? And, whether it's justice reform, energy, workers' rights, right? Labor protections. Those are the things that I've been talking about and will continue to talk about. And, I think the folks in Charlottesville will appreciate this. We rolled out a plan, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks ago now, to have field offices, right? Satellite offices all across the state, because now, thankfully, we don't have to worry about crazy stuff coming out of Washington every single day, right? We still got to keep our eye on there, even though Democrats are in charge. We still want to make sure we're staying vigilant. But now we can really focus on Virginia and focus on the folks who have been left behind, who feel forgotten, who feel marginalized, whether you're in the Eastern Shore, you're in South Side, right? We got to go meet people where they are, right? Roll up our sleeves and really understand those communities and their issues and what we can do for them, right? Joining federal lawsuits is great, right? It's cool for a press headline, but we want to be about real results and we want to be about engaging with people. And so COVID has been awful, but it's allowed us to really go and be in a lot of places and go have a lot of conversations with folks. 2019 we were in person, 2020 was virtual and distant, and even when elected, right, we'll go visit all 133 localities in the state because people won't have to see you. They've got to understand that you're there for them, and that's my top priority, is returning this office back to the people.
Well, I mean, I think you're spot on in that the Attorney General has been playing defense for the last 4 years. I mean, they're really just trying to be this like dike between us and DC. But now we have this opportunity, now that we don't have to be just quite so vigilant all the time about what might be coming down from Washington, to really be proactive. And I think that you highlighted a couple things that I know will be especially important to people in our community. And I would love to dig in on some of the details there. One of them, first and foremost, is this pathway to legalization of marijuana, which, I mean, I think as you and I both know, what actually got passed out of the General Assembly this year is very much a lightweight framework and a timeline, and really sort of a promise to do more in the future than it is a detailed plan that delivers anything that impacts people's lives right now. Sure. And I know that both of us are hungry for that process to move faster and to be richer. Talk to us, if you could, for a bit about what got passed and from your perspective, what the timeline for the future looks like.
Yeah, I think it became the hottest topic of the session, and I think in large part because I wish we wouldn't do this, but we wait until the very end to do some of the more significant things, and then time starts to be the most important factor, and so you want to get something done, so we got something done. And I voted yes because I didn't want to see that bill go down, because I am very cognizant of the fact that we have very important elections in November. And if the makeup of the House changes, that might not even be on the table anymore. And so, there are people who I am very close to, who I love and adore, who didn't vote or who voted no. And I couldn't get there because I have faith that the governor is going to amend that bill to meet the moment, right? To meet our sort of our desires and our visions for that bill. Yes, it's a framework for 2024. There's a lot that goes into this. And I told one of my law partners before, I said, look, this is going to be a heavy lift, because even with the JLARC study, which was incredibly comprehensive, if you go into the code of Virginia online and you just type in marijuana or cannabis, there's like over 100 something references throughout the code. And so doing this, I sort of liken it to if you ever had a tree removed from your house, and the roots of the tree have sort of wrapped around like a pipe, and it's really hard to get that tree out. Like, that's what this is. And it couldn't be done hastily. And so look, July 1, 2021, that's where we all want to get to. And I think the governor hopefully is going to do that. But certainly I'd rather have the framework in place and get the ball rolling than nothing. And I think that sort of brings up one of the things that you figure out as a legislator is that it's not always as easy and as simple as that first newspaper headline might be, or that first tweet might be. We've got to make some choices that oftentimes aren't necessarily black or white or binary. Right. Everything's got a little bit of nuance to it. And so, did I love the bill? Absolutely not. Right. I think there's some justice stuff in there, especially as it relates to juveniles. It's got to be worked on. The 2021 date, obviously very important to me too. And I think in a conversation that we've had, I think, with each other, right, is the vertical integration issue, right? Do we want some of the big, companies to be able to sort of do all of it, or do we want to sort of try to have a tiered system like we have for wine and for beer, right? To sort of have people in sort of separate silos, and so you have, I think, a little bit more participation, and then the minority aspect of it, right? Minority participation, and then how do those funds get diverted to, I think, historically, disadvantaged communities, and the expungement issue, all of that, right? There's so much that goes into it, and so I need to see something, right? Like I hope that we can get this thing done, because I do think, realistically, who knows what happens in these elections in November, right? Who knows what happens in between now and then that's going to drive the day and it's going to push people out to vote, right? We think we have an idea, but you just never know what's going to happen. And so, I'm hopeful that we can get to a place where everybody says, okay, this is good, right? This is something that we can work with. And, if it's that, we go on and hopefully come back and we make it better, right? That's the goal, is you come back and you keep trying to tweak and refine, based on feedback, stakeholders, all of those things. And, so I'm hopeful that over the course of the next couple of months, we can get something that's going to put us where I think most of us want to be, frankly.
I mean, as usual, I think you covered a lot of ground and a lot of nuance, and there are a few of those pieces that I would really just underscore and highlight for people who are trying to hang on to where are we at in our path to legalization in Virginia. I mean, the first of those is that the good that came out of passing this bill in this form, if Governor Northam signs it, is that no matter what work we do in the next 3 years, we are going to be legalizing marijuana by 2024. And that was not a given going into this session. And putting that down on paper, no matter who holds the House next year, if there happens to be, a Republican turnover in the House, there will still be a Democratic Senate, there will still be a Democratic governor. And so we are on that path in Virginia. And I think that was an important marker to put down. But I know, as I was out and about with constituents today, just, grabbing coffee this morning, I had people asking me, so like, what really happened? Like, what mattered for my life? And the piece that I think they really missed, which was a big source of sort of push and pull among the progressive part of our caucus, is, so what are we doing to stop the harm now from the overcriminalization of cannabis? And that was the second piece that you mentioned, which is, can we get the governor to send us down amendments when we reconvene next month in Richmond? And I think there are a lot of us, both Delegate Jones and I together, who are actively calling for an end to the civil penalty for civil possession of cannabis, because we recognize right now how much harm is being done from that work. I mean, here in Charlottesville, we have not been handing down civil penalties since marijuana was decriminalized in July 1. We have 0 of those citations issued, but we also understand that this community is unusual, that if you look at places like Hanover County, where Black people make up 10% of the population, but 60% of the citations, that you do not have a police force that is quite like ours. I mean, we're fortunate to have a Black female police chief who said at the very beginning, I'm not doing that to the people that I serve. Not all communities are like that. And so I think what we have a job to do is help elevate our experience here in the last year. We have lived through effectively 8 months of what it would be like to have no penalty for simple possession here in Charlottesville. And we're doing all right.
Right.
Like it's pretty fine. And so the more we can do to kind of amplify that and to help call on the governor with the support of people all across the Commonwealth, and say, let's accelerate that piece. And then the third piece is, as Delegate Jones was saying, building up the regulations for the market for recreational cannabis is a bigger project. Tearing down bad laws and bad penalties, that can be relatively swift work, but building up a system,
creating a framework is hard, right? And this whole thing, right, to me, is very much indicative of how important it is for everybody to understand the process. And we got a lot of calls, a lot of emails and to the office about the vote. They're like, well, you voted yes, or what are you going to do? And I don't think most folks, and this is no one's fault, realize that we send that bill to the governor, he can amend it for veto session. And it wasn't the last bite at the apple. Veto session will be the last bite at the apple. And so there is a tremendous amount of work that goes into bills between now and then too, right? My workers' compensation bill for first responders and law enforcement and firefighters, so that they could have a presumption for COVID under the workers' compensation framework. My bill is only retroactive till September 1st, 2020, Whereas her bill for healthcare workers, which is fantastic, is retroactive to March 12th of 2020, right, the beginning of the state of emergency. I'm working with stakeholders and the governor to see if we can push my bill farther back to sweep in more time, because I believe that those people are putting themselves on the line for us to keep everything moving, to keep us safe, and they should be afforded that opportunity. So, there's a lot of stuff that's going on between when we adjourned last Monday and when we come back. I guess now we have two veto sessions, because one for regular and one for the special. So we've got, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think, it's important for folks to remain engaged and say, just because we adjourned a couple of days ago does not mean that the battle is over, and does not mean that the conversation has ended. We've still got a little bit more time. And I think that's one of those things that folks don't often realize, because it's not necessarily something that's reported in the news stories or in our Facebook posts, or, even in the textbooks that the kids are using in high school.
No, I think that's true. I mean, the General Assembly session is warp speed, especially when we're in these short years where we're doing 6 weeks. And the stuff that passes by the last day is really like a commitment to keep talking. And then we continue to refine over the weeks in coming down with reconvene. And while it's officially the governor who sends down that amendment, practically speaking, it's all of us working together to talk about, what he would send our way. I mean, I think that that's one of the really functional parts about having a Democratic trifecta in Richmond, is that, we are all coordinating to make sure that we get to the strongest legislation that we can all abide by come next month. And so, I mean, I hope that people hear that, what fits in a headline about what passed about cannabis reform in Richmond in the last month is really only the beginning of a story. And please keep talking with us if you have questions. The other piece that you talked about when you were talking about places where you have been actively involved in pushing the frontier of policy in Virginia is qualified immunity. And that's something that I would love to give you a chance to talk about at greater length, because if that's not a phrase that's already on your radar, it's kind of a deep, weedy, wonky kind of thing.
Yes.
But it is also very important, and I think very much a sign of the times of the kind of conversations we should be having about what accountable justice looks like. So I'd love to give you a chance to explain to folks, what does qualified immunity mean? Where are we at in Virginia, and why have you put that at the top of your list for justice reforms?
Yeah. So, but as a threshold matter, I got to give a shout out to my brother, Jeff Bourne, because Jeff has carried this bill for the last couple of sessions, and he has been the loudest, best champion on this issue that you could ever think of. And for folks who are not familiar, because it's always, I think, good to give a primer on what we're talking about. Qualified immunity is a principle at the federal level that basically is an affirmative defense that allows, in most cases, you're talking about law enforcement, to escape civil liability. And at the state level, and this is what Jeff's bill was going at this year, was the principle of sovereign immunity, because almost always, law enforcement officers are employees of the city or the locality. And so the locality, if there's a situation, can invoke that defense. And you really can't go beyond, we just want a jury trial, right? A trial of the peers or the judge to determine whether or not reasonable force was used in those situations. And this really became an issue because of George Floyd. And then we've had some issues here in Virginia, right? The Fairfax County, where a state police officer yanked a motorist out of the vehicle, right? And kind of put him into a little bit of a chokehold. And, while I have the utmost faith in a lot of prosecutors here in Virginia who would go after that misconduct in the criminal sort of lane, that's great. But I also think that if your constitutional rights have been deprived, which is what this is, that you should have the opportunity for civil redress. And so this concept brings together strange bedfellows, right? We have conservative organizations that also very much support these principles as an addition to liberal folks as well. And I always tell people politics is not a straight line, it is a circle, because the far right and the far left are probably closer on some issues than they actually realize. And it can make for some interesting pairs. And I think this is one of those situations. And, it gets a bad rap because people say that it's anti-police, and it's not anti-police, it's pro-constitutional rights. And if you are pro-civil liberty, if you're pro-civil rights, this is a bill for you. And I've made that plea to our Republican colleagues in the House who all voted against it back in special, and to make sure that they understand what you're doing. And, it's because don't believe that it squares with some of the things that they talk about and some of the values that they seem to espouse. But it is one of those things that also brings in the local governments, and they talk about their insurance policies, and they talk about how much money this will cost. And I do believe that the cost that has been put up over the course of the last couple sessions has been a little bit of a red herring. And again, and I understand why folks do this, right? When you talk about the fiscal impact statements, you've got to give the sort of worst case scenario of every single person was allowed to do this, like how much money would this actually cost? But we know that that's not going to happen, because if an incident occurs, which we never want, if that officer acted reasonably, right, and acted in accordance with their training, they have nothing to worry about. But in the situations where someone goes rogue, goes be outside the scope of what they're supposed to be doing, yeah, I would like for there to be some accountability. And that's all this is, right? It's an accountability measure, and it's enhancing the transparency of the relationship between law enforcement and the community. Because I do think we've got to continue to build and strengthen those relationships. I think, in large part because of what was coming out of Washington for the last 4 years, there's been this distrust and mistrust that's been sown. And I think when we talk about how do we get to a place where everybody is moving in the same direction, accountability and transparency are key. And not just when it comes to sort of police reform, but across the board. And, we want folks to have faith in government. We want folks to have faith in public institutions, in the folks who are supposed to be working for them. And the only way to do that, and I know you've been a little bit involved in some of the FOIA stuff, right, is for transparency and accountability to win the day. And when we talk about good governance, this is a good governance bill. And, it's been sent to a study because the Senate is not ready for this, it seems. And I'm disappointed in that. And I've been disappointed in the fact that, people who tout themselves as justice reformers have been quiet as church mice on this thing. And, it's not particularly popular, but part of what we want out of our public officials is for people to step up. And, it's easy to lurch from politically popular thing to politically popular thing and say, yeah, we've been about this for a long, long time. It's another thing to say, hey, I know this is the right thing for us to do. It's not popular yet, but I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to use my platform to make people aware and try to change some hearts and minds. And, Jeff and I had looked to some people who sort of tout themselves as being justice reformers or being, sort of in that mold. And, the silence was deafening. And, I will tell you, there are days when he and I felt like we were kind of out alone on an island in that regard. And I wouldn't, there's no other person I'd rather stand with while doing this. But it's certainly, to me, we talk about meeting moments. This is a policy that would meet the moment.
Well, absolutely. I mean, leadership is standing up for an idea before it's cool and long before it's safe. And this is definitely one of those issues that is still dicey, even within the justice reform community, at least for some people. I think it's also an issue that resonates a lot with the Charlottesville community, because what I hear from constituents all the time is that they understand that we can ban specific bad behaviors. We can ban chokeholds. We can ban no knocks. But ultimately, if they already believe that their rights are being violated on a day-to-day basis, then unless there is a catch-all accountability that says, if something goes wrong, here's this backstop that you can turn to exercise your rights and ensure that you get a fair hearing, then it doesn't matter how many specific bad behaviors we single out. Until we have that backstop, all of those other laws are for naught. And I think that's why qualified immunity is such an essential part of the picture. It's why civilian review boards are. If there isn't an outlet to exercise justice, if you've been wronged, then it doesn't matter what else we put on the books. And I think that's why it's so valuable.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I firmly believe that this is, we can't talk about justice reform and not talk about reassessing this policy, whether it's sovereign immunity at the state level, qualified immunity at the federal level. And it's gotten to the point where judges are clamoring for a change in this. And if folks don't know, this policy has its roots dated back in like the post-Civil War era in the Klan. And it was done to protect law enforcement who were basically assaulting Black folks, and there was no recourse, right? It was basically like a sort of state sanctioned protection of this stuff. And, we all have the deepest respect for law enforcement, right? I mean, period, full stop. But that doesn't mean that just because you are tasked with enforcing the law that you are above the law. Mm-hmm. And that is this, I think, sort of distinction that gets sort of muddied by, oh, well, it's an anti-police measure. And that's not true, because most, if not almost all cops are good, right? They do their job. They put themselves in the line each and every day. And I respect and appreciate and thank them for that. But there are times when things go south, right? Things go left. And in those unfortunate circumstances, every person should be able to have redress, right? This country like prides itself on having a justice system that, you know, allows you to sort of work your way through the process. And you've got, you know, attorneys who are involved, you've got judges who are involved, you've got juries who are involved, who are going to be presented with the facts and can make that assessment. What I don't like, and, you know, I think what is the problem is that this mechanism stops that process in its tracks for this on this one path, and that just does not sit well with me. And, you know, as Attorney General, we'll continue to be a loud voice, right? Whether I need to be involved and I can be involved or not, does not mean I'm going to sit on my hands and say, that's not my battle, that's not my fight. That's just not where we are. And I think as we look ahead, right, we want people who are going to step up, and we want people who are going to sort of be, you know, there even in the darkest of days. And, you know, this is one of those things where I will continue to use my pulpit, my platform, and be that voice. And, you know, that's never going to change.
Yeah, I mean, I think the core of it is the idea that no one is above the law, including the people who enforce it. And something else that has become crystal clear for me in becoming a lawmaker is that a law is only ever as strong as the litigation that protects it. Mm-hmm. That, you know, if you cannot pursue recourse if the law is violated, then, you know, there's a big incentive for people to try to push and see whether or not that law really stands. Right. One thing that you touched on that I would love to have you give a chance to talk about more, because I know it's something that matters a lot to this community, is the intersection between the AG's office and labor, because it's not something that I think a lot of people would think of immediately as something that is core to the AG's office. But I know that you have done a lot of work about enforcing our labor laws. And could you talk to us about what you've done on that front already, and then how you would think about using that AG's pulpit to protect workers in the future?
Yeah, you know, look, to me, this state touts itself on being the best state for business, and that is fantastic. But to me, you can't be the best state for business and not prioritize your workforce and protect your workers. And, you know, the AG's office is tasked with that. And I've been disappointed over the last, you know, several years to understand that, you know, issues of wage theft and worker misclassification have been collecting dust on desks in that office. And, you know, recently, I think there was an announcement about the creation of a new unit. And, you know, I think that's perfectly timely. And I wish that labor didn't become a political football. But, you know, you've had a lot of time to address the issues, and you really don't until it's, you know, 3 months before a primary. So I think people need to take that and sort of noodle on it. But, you know, I have been really vocal about the creation of a civil rights division in the AG's office that's akin to what we have at the federal level, to basically be that watchdog, have investigatory power, that enforcement power, you know, to protect, you know, Virginians, you know, civil rights, whether it's related to issues of racism, whether it's institutional, in housing, in our financial system. You know, that to me is pretty powerful. And so I had a bill that would have created that Office of Civil Rights, and it had enforcement mechanisms in there for wage theft and worker misclassification, which the bill that ended up passing doesn't. The bill that ended up passing just changes the name of the office. And as I said on the floor, and I believe this, right, that's just lipstick on a pig. And you can claim that as a win, but, you know, it's deeds, not words, right? Like, you've got to sort of sit back and say, okay, well, how is this actually going to impact folks? And so, you know, again, I talked a little bit earlier about values, right? How you're deploying resources. Jay Jones, as Attorney General, will have bodies, right, in a labor group to enforce and protect folks. Because if people are fearful, right, about making claims because they feel like no one's going to have their back, they're going to be quiet. And to me, that is not helpful for diversifying our workforce, for strengthening our workforce. And, you know, that's part of the field office program, right, would be to go and tell people, hey, we are here for you if you have some issues in the workplace that need to be addressed. And if we are not the ones who can help you directly, here's a path to get you to where you need to be. And, you know, my my grandmother who passed away a couple years ago, who was a spark plug, a firecracker. She said, "You got to go meet people where they are," right? She goes, "There, you got to go to them." And I think, that's no different here. And, at the end of the day, right, that office is there for the Virginian people, right? It's there to be the protector, to be the advocate, to be the consumer protection office that it is. And so within that consumer protection mandate, worker protections is a natural extension of that. And so I've been proud to stand with labor in my 4 years in the legislature. Even left my old law firm because didn't think they were necessarily on the right side of some labor issues. And I've been proud to represent folks on on employment matters, right? Plaintiffs going up against their employer, because it's tough. It can be expensive. It can be, sort of depressing, and you feel like you're sort of left alone. But we want a backstop, right? We want someone who's going to be there. And so I'm excited about the opportunity and the prospect of really sort of putting that at the forefront, from day one.
I mean, I think that there are two things that occurred to me while you were talking. One of them is that I think that we have to be vigilant of this stuff everywhere, that labor law violations can happen anywhere. I was reminded this morning, I think, in talking with Delegate Krizik, who represents the Fairfax area, that there's currently a wage theft allegation on site at the construction of the Virginia General Assembly building.
JB. Exactly.
It's literally right under our nose. I mean,
Yeah.
We've been trying to be the legislature who is combating wage theft, and the very people who are building the building in which we're going to work are currently complaining, and that there is wage theft going on, and we have every reason to believe them.
And it's not new, Sally. I mean, this has been sort of addressed, and it's been sort of talked about for a long time. And so, we want action, right? Not inaction. And again, you want people who are going to lead from the front and not sort of be the sort of the people who come late to the party. And, values, right? What you're prioritizing and highlighting is really, really important. And it sends a signal to people. And, as we look ahead, right, we're creating a stronger, equitable, more just Virginia, but we got a long way to go. And, the time for action is urgent and immediate, right? It's not, we can slow like this. We're talking about people's lives and their livelihoods.
And the other piece is that I don't think, when you talk about making the attorney general and meeting people where they are and having these satellite offices, I don't think we currently live in a world where every Virginian knows that they have a lawyer they can go to when something is wrong. I think of all the professions in the world, the legal profession is still the most intimidating to most people, because they know that the lawyers write the rules, and often the lawyers are the only ones who can read them. And so it's like they're playing a game that only they can read the rules of, which is intimidating to everyone. Right, exactly. It's really, it's really unnerving, no matter how much education you have as a physician, or an accountant or whatever, you still know that the lawyers wrote the rules, and in some sense only they can read them. And to create a world where every Virginian knew that there was a place where they could go and say, hey, I think I'm not getting a fair shake.
Yeah.
And right now, speaking up about a labor violation is really scary, because you understand that the backlash is you could lose your job.
You're going to get fired, right? And the protections there are not as strong as they should be. And again, none of this comes at the expense of a healthy business environment at all, right? And the field office and satellite office program, it's ambitious, right? It's a big state, right? I've been in the car a lot over the last couple of years, and I've seen, a lot of different parts of this Commonwealth that I had never seen before. And, I've become so much more acquainted with the folks who are out in Southside and Shenandoah Valley and Southwest, where your judges are riding the circuit, right? Why shouldn't we have folks who are doing that for the AG's office too, right? Mm-hmm. And that to me is a natural and logical sort of way for us to look at 21 and say, hey, where have we been and where can we go? And, it is to me time to bring this office back to the people. And, I think there has been this misconception that was created, I think, 20, 25 years ago by Republicans who said, well, this office is the top cop. Right, we're going to be the chief law enforcement officer, and you are the chief law enforcement officer, but not in the way that it's been painted.
Mhm.
And, we know that the Attorney General's office is a sort of creature of statute. But I think it's time for us to really reorient that. And going way back to what I said in the beginning, challenging the status quo and questioning why we do things just because that's the way that it's been done for a long, long time is healthy for us. And I think
Mhm.
21 is the year where, whether it's AG, LG, Gov, right, House of Delegates, people are, one, being presented with choices across the board, which is fantastic, but two, have an opportunity to say, okay, well, how do we want to chart this course forward, right? And what do we want this to look like? Because this, again, I think it's going to be one of those foundational elections where people will look back and say, wow, that was the moment when things really started to shift in earnest. And so, I mean, I think it's an incredible prospect, and it's really, really exciting. And I will tell you, it has been so much fun to be able to be a part of it all.
Well, it's interesting when you say that. You talk about the AG being the top law enforcement officer, and that there are some people who immediately make the jump to being the top cop. It's like they forget that not all our laws are in the criminal code,
Mm-hmm.
that we do a whole lot with our laws that have nothing to do with locking people up. It's something that I think about a lot, as an economist who sometimes has bills before the criminal law subcommittee. I think all the time, if we gave as much care to how we lift people up as how we lock people up, we
Mm-hmm.
might do a lot of things differently
And
in
spend as much
Virginia.
money on lifting people up as we do locking people up. Right? We
Absolutely.
spend an incredible amount of money incarcerating people in the state, when that money really needs to be deployed for diversion, right, and rehabilitation. And if people who have never been to a correctional facility or a jail, you got to walk through there, because it will really change your perspective on things. But look, 18.2 and 19.2, where the criminal code sits in the code, we got to start all over, right? That's due for a full overhaul, because again, that's got vestiges of the black codes and Jim Crow just sitting right there. But there's so much more. It's such a broad. The Office of AG is such a broad purview. You have a criminal aspect of it in a way, but you're really, most of your work is like a civil enforcement, sort of gig. And there are ways, right, to go and let people know how much you can do for them. But I think that's on us, right, to go and sort of take that message to the people, and not just the people who vote for us. Because when we talk about going out into these communities, these are places that aren't necessarily voting for Democratic candidates. But just because I'm a Democrat and you don't vote for me doesn't mean that I don't work for you too.
Well, I mean, I think that's maybe a good place for us to wrap up, because we are sort of nearing the end of time. You talked about, what is it like to talk with the Shenandoah Valley, which is like to talk with Southside. Obviously, those are places that are closer to us here in Seville than they are to
Yeah.
Norfolk. How do you think about making your pitch to those places that are more deeply red? How do you talk about these values that I think you and I share, and probably a lot of people watching, in those places that may not, look at you on a mailer and think that's my guy?
Yeah, look, and I wrote about this in an op-ed with Senator Todd Pillion back in December of 19, and we were talking about school funding, and whether it's schools, whether it's justice reform, whether it's healthcare, whether it's energy, especially when you talk about geography, right? Our premise was that we come from very different places, right? Pillion's from Abingdon, I'm from Norfolk, right? My district is a majority district. I represent every single low-income housing community in the city. He is from Ruby Red, Abingdon, Virginia. But our people, they might look different, but the problems are the same, And so we both have schools that need some real structural TLC. We both have health populations where the healthcare is a real priority. Energy, right? Our bills are too high. That's not a partisan issue. And so, the pitch is, we might not sort of agree on everything, but there are some real core issues that we all can get behind, and we can all, sort of work together and work towards. And again, just because you might not vote for me doesn't mean that I'm not going to be working for you, right? I'm from a very, very, very Democratic district. There are people who don't vote for me. That doesn't mean that I don't answer their calls when they call the office, right? Or when they send us an email. And so I think, as we look ahead, right, we look to 21, we have an opportunity to really prioritize, highlight, and value, right, where we want to go, right? We've got to look forward and not back. And I think, as a younger guy, as a person of color, right, as a Black man who's been in this state with a really challenging history with race, we're ready, right? Virginia is ready, and we can meet this moment together. And that's, really, I think the crux of it is, we can redefine ourselves and really be, I think, a beacon, not just in the Mid-Atlantic, but across this country about what this place is all about and what we are doing and where we are going. And I'm so sort of optimistic about it, because I really do think that we are turning this corner, and sort of, the status quo is no longer going to be accepted. And, that's something that I think you and I have talked about a lot. And I think, people are ready for that. And people are ready to move on and to do something different. And that's, to me, is really, really interesting and exciting and appealing.
Well, if we've got folks who are tuning in, then Jay, talk to us about how they can help. If you've got somebody who's fired up about this, I know that we are less than 100 days till this primary, which is a little bit wild, the short runway we have left. If you've got somebody who's excited,
shorter runway, because we made it possible for folks to vote really, really early, which is
that's
awesome.
Right. Well, remind them about that. I mean, if you've got folks who are jazzed about the campaign, how can they help? What should they do?
Yeah, they can go to our website, jjones.com. It's just my name. Pretty simple. Follow us on social media, sign up. We're always looking for folks to come join the movement. I'm really proud of the fact that Governor Northam, Congresswoman Elaine Luria, 30 plus members of the General Assembly, and folks from local offices all across the state have said, look, this is what we're ready for, and this is the moment that we're in, and we think that Jay Jones is the guy, and would love to have everybody check us out. If I didn't answer your questions tonight, I apologize, but please shoot us a note, shoot us an email, and always love to be able to sort of engage with folks, even beyond Zoom. But again, this campaign is rolling. We are gaining momentum each and every day. Early voting starts on April 23rd or 24th. I can't remember which day, but that's awesome. And, so we're really maybe about 6 weeks away from people being able to go get their ballots. And I hope that they will cast their ballot for Jay Jones for Attorney General.
Well, fantastic. For folks, if you tuned in tonight, thank you for being with us. I mean, I know that if you're here with us on a Sunday night, then you are one of the really, engaged folks who has embraced your role in our democracy in Virginia. Now is not the time to go back to sleep. That was the time to continue to push the pace here. I hope you understand the tremendous role that the Attorney General has, that all of the power that comes with the flexibility of that office, and that you're excited about the work that the Delegate Jones would bring to this. I have felt so fortunate to serve with you, Jay, both, as a colleague, as a professional colleague, but also as a friend. It means a lot to have other people with the same kind of spirit and energy about this work. So thank you for doing that work. Thank you for being with us here tonight, taking time out of a very busy campaign schedule to be with us. Is there anything else you want to leave people with before we sign off?
Well, I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you. And I know that you're doing this for everybody. And I think that's great, because I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before. And, your folks are really lucky to have you representing them. And I hope they all know how passionate, energetic, and just intellectual you are about all of these issues. And you're one of the best listeners out there. And so I just want to say thanks for all that you do, for being my friend, all right, for being a great colleague. And hopefully we will be in Seville, soon, distantly, safely, however we can make it work, because I'm overdue for my Charlottesville fix.
Absolutely. It's a very special place that we get to call home here. And it's, I look forward to having more people back. But in the meantime, Jay, thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you to everybody for being with us tonight. We will be back here, same spot, 7:00 next Sunday. Thank you for tuning in, and good night for tonight.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.